Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Happy March. Happy National Nutrition Month. It is noon. We're going to give it one more minute before we get started. A few housekeeping things today. Feel free to use the Q&A feature at any point to ask any questions, leave any comments. I'll do my best to keep an eye on those as we go through if we have time at the end. If not, we will get your answers to you after today's session. All right, let's get started. I don't want to wait too long. We have a lot of great information to cover today. So hi again, and welcome to our well-being webisode. Let's debunk some common nutrition myths. I am Kelly, a health service specialist at Geisinger, and with me today is Amy. Amy is a registered dietitian and a certified culinary medicine specialist at Geisinger. She runs the Culinary Medicine program, where she educates healthcare professionals on medical nutrition therapy and nutrition education and counseling skills for their patients, as well as the community, via healthy cooking classes, both in person and online. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics with a focus on eco-gastronomy from the University of New Hampshire. She studied the contrast between the Western and Mediterranean diets and the American versus Italian food systems in Italy. She has a Master's of Science in Clinical Nutrition from the University of Buffalo. Amy was recently named the Pennsylvania Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recognized Young Dietitian of the Year. Today we're going to discuss some of the most common nutrition myths and identify ways to ensure the information we are accessing is accurate. Just a disclaimer that all the information being provided today is to increase your awareness. It's not intended to be medical advice. Any specific health-related questions should be directed to your physician. Welcome, Amy, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.
So to get started, scrolling through social media, as many of us do, or reading your favorite magazine, or visiting popular websites exposes us to endless information about nutrition and health. Amy, would you say most of what you read online about nutrition is accurate, or there are a lot of myths and misconceptions floating around?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the source. So I would say there's definitely some accurate information if it's coming from a seasoned healthcare professional like a doctor or a dietitian. A lot of the not so dependable information on social media is popular because it's based on pseudoscience. So there's some half-truths to a lot of those things. They'll take a nugget of information that is true, that's rooted in research, but then apply it inappropriately, or maybe extrapolate it to an audience that it doesn't apply to. So when looking at nutrition online, we really want to make sure we're getting it from a trusted source and taking it with a grain of salt, because some of that information might be true for a specific patient population, but that might not be you.
The internet is definitely great. It gives us that quick fix of access to an abundance of information at our fingertips. But it definitely, like you just mentioned, because of the pseudoscience and not applying to everyone, I think it's led to confusion and feelings of overwhelm for individuals. Like you mentioned already, there might be some myths, misconceptions out there around nutrition. But why do you think people believe these myths and jump on the bandwagon for the latest trend or diet?
Yeah. Honestly, I think happens is a lot of the fad diets are popular because they bring what we call like a quick or crash result that isn't really promoting health. Okay, so a lot of the fad diets are rooted in a drastic change immediately. So when anybody goes from eating a Western diet, which is full of sugar, simple carbohydrates, saturated fats, overeating, right, not portion control, and makes any change, we're going to see a result. But oftentimes these fad diet trends tend to be a crash in carbohydrate. And when we see that crash in carbohydrate, we see our body start to get rid of our water storage. So you'll see your friend, your neighbor, your cousin online saying, I lost 20 pounds in 3 weeks from this diet. But was that true fat loss? Probably not. It was probably water loss. So I think what happens is we see these great success stories from a lot of different people that are short term, but especially in our American diet culture, we're so focused on body weight as the marker of health. So even with a body weight reduction, we can see disease development. So even if the weight comes off, we can see the development of lipid issues, so cholesterol issues or blood pressure issues or things like that. So we really want to start focusing on the health of our eating and not just what the scale says. And I think it's really important to realize like what works for Susie might not work for Sally. So we don't really need to overcomplicate it. We just need to find what works for us that leads to a positive health outcome. And I really, really find that these extreme results and the crash nature of these diets really capitalize on people's confusion and desperation to make a positive change. And they try to they'll simplify things by making it complicated, if that makes sense. So what we hope to do at Geisinger is educate our patients on the how and why behind making healthy nutrition choices. So that way, when things like that come up, we can use a little bit more critical thinking to make sure that we're making right choices for ourselves.
Yeah, so when we're seeing those people online who have the great success, we're thinking more into like what that would look like for us versus assuming that we're going to see the same results. I think we mentioned it a little bit already, but all of this information, especially on nutrition, the so many diets that are out there and the supplements, it makes healthy eating seem complicated. Is healthy eating complicated?
Not at all. Really, truly, it's not. It's really just comes down to, does this really make sense? So a really popular diet trend these days is the ketogenic diet, right? And I'll be very honest, like even as someone who went to school for 6 years for nutrition, I'm a dietitian, culinary medicine specialist, I would have a hard time doing the ketogenic diet in a way that was truly healthy. So if we have anyone who's, a firefighter or a teacher or someone who's not a nutrition professional trying to do this ketogenic diet, the messaging on the internet is that you can eat bacon and chicken wings and all of these things. So if we sit back and use our critical thinking skills of, hey, does that make sense? Am I going to be healthier if my diet is full of bacon and chicken wings and that type of food, the high fat food? Does that make sense? Probably not. So really, eating healthy is really uncomplicated. Lots of fruits and vegetables, legumes, whole grains, lean meat, dairy, fish. I mean, healthy fats. Yeah.
I think we make it more complicated, the consumers, than it has to be.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into some of the common nutrition myths we hear a lot about. From my research, I did identify 5 common myths that we're going to discuss. But to the audience, feel free to add any myths into the Q&A section that you would like addressed. So you already said that healthy eating doesn't have to be complicated. But what about the cost of it? We often hear the phrases, eating healthy is very expensive. Is that a myth? Is that a fact? And can you provide some more insight into it?
Sure. I am regularly disputing this point. I kind of refer to myself as the budget-oriented dietitian. So in my culinary medicine program, we spend the first week looking at 4 different pasta recipes and seeing the small changes that occur when making, or big nutrition changes that occur when making small ingredient changes. And I actually calculated the cost of each recipe, and the first recipe that is the least healthy is significantly more expensive than all of my other recipes that are more health promoting. So I think where this like nutrition is or healthy eating is expensive comes from the misconception of what we as healthcare providers mean when we say quality, right? So quality versus nutrition quality. So when I say quality, I mean an apple, which has fiber and vitamins and minerals and, all of the great stuff that comes from a piece of fruit, versus apple juice, which is just sugar, doesn't have that fiber, maybe some vitamins, but it's not as healthy as the apple. I think what our patient population hears when we say quality is that the apple has to be grown on a micro orchard blessed by George Clooney, and the water has to come from melted North Pole ice cubes. And that is not the case. You don't have to get expensive ingredients. We just want the ingredients to be of a good nutrition quality. So I think that's where the misconception is. However, to be very honest, I think the other point when it comes to eating healthy is if you want to, how you spend your time as a means of expense, right? So a really great example is that it takes a long time to find convenience foods that have the best ingredients, right? The nutrition quality ingredients. When you find that food, it tends to have a higher price point. However, what goes into that ingredient or that food is not expensive if you make it yourself. So a really great example is granola bars. To find a really high quality granola bar might be higher in price than the less healthy versions. But if you buy oats and canola oil and applesauce and honey and chocolate chips or whatever, and put that into a granola bar and make it yourself, it's like 25 cents. So it's not as expensive if you're willing to spend 10 minutes on making it yourself.
Those are great points that I think you hit on, and great tips to consider. Um, so another myth that I want us to explore is that all fat is bad. Is there any truth to that? And what should we focus our attention on when it comes to including fats in our diet?
Yeah, I just kind of want to level set here. Villainizing any macronutrient is not rooted in science. So this was really like in the 90s and early 2000s that like fat was very villainized, and now we're seeing carbohydrates be really villainized. But within the fat category, we have health promoting fats and less health promoting fats, right? And then same with carbohydrates, health promoting carbohydrates and less health promoting carbohydrates. So to answer your question directly, is all fat bad? Absolutely not. We have fats that actually promote health. They're not just neutral, they make you healthier. And then we have fats that, if eaten out of balance and in excess, can lead to disease rather quickly. So the quote unquote good fats, right, are health fats. Healthy fats are unsaturated high omega-3 fatty acids. They work to lower your blood pressure. They lower your LDL or bad cholesterol. They raise your HDL or good cholesterol. They help with blood sugar control. They help with cell integrity, neurological health. Like there's so many great benefits to unsaturated fats. So the message here is really choosing more of those in our diet when we have a fat containing food. So those sources would be like the bottled oils would be like canola, avocado, or olive oil. And then the actual food sources would be like nuts, seeds, avocados, seafood, stuff like that.
Great. Yeah. So we shouldn't just, I think the big takeaway here is that, fat is an essential component of a healthy eating pattern. Like you said, all macronutrients are, and, focusing more on the source of it versus eliminating it.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears here a bit to gluten. I've heard that a gluten-free diet is good for everyone. Is that accurate, or what should we be thinking about when it comes to following a gluten-free diet?
Sure. So where this all came from was there were very limited options for individuals who had actual intolerances or like could not safely eat gluten. Gluten is a protein that's in a lot of grain products like wheat, for example. So there are people who have a physiological reaction when they eat gluten and therefore safely can't eat gluten. Just like peanuts, right? There's peanut allergies out there that person can't eat peanuts safely. So what happened was the food industry was like, okay, let's try to create more options for individuals with gluten intolerances and celiac disease. So they started making products that were gluten-free. Well, anytime we see blank free on a product, general population who doesn't have a lot of knowledge behind that thing automatically thinks that thing is bad for us. So we all kind of dealt with a bunch of people jumping on this gluten-free train as a means because they thought, well, if a product is marketed as gluten-free, then it must be healthier. Gluten must be bad. So we need to kind of level set that the only people who should really be eating a gluten-free diet are the people who have physiological gluten intolerance or gluten free like celiac disease. And you would know that from your physician. You would bring that forward. They would test you for that. To eat gluten-free without having that is exactly the same as eating peanut-free if you don't have a peanut allergy. So what is interesting behind the gluten-free crowd that is not actually needing to be gluten-free electively is what I would like to call that, is they'll start to feel better. They'll start to see like quote unquote results. And that, just like I said before, if we're going from eating a lot of like cookies and white bread and things like that to starting to eat gluten-free, quote unquote, gluten-free products, right? Or naturally gluten-free foods like a zucchini that doesn't have any wheat in it, we're going to feel better. But we don't have to go to that extreme if not completely biologically necessary. But one thing I really want to point out is gluten. Because my background is culinary medicine specialist, I really like the food science behind things. So gluten's job in a food is a binder. That's what it does. So actually, if you take like, this is a fun experiment if you have kids, so turn your ears on. If you have a ball of dough, like you get pizza dough from the store, and you run it under water and rinse out all the starch, you'll be left with just gluten, and that's that stretchy stuff. So it acts to bind things together. And that's what you're doing when you're kneading dough. You're activating that gluten to bind that binder. So when we take that out for a gluten-free product, like a gluten-free bread or a gluten-free pasta, we have to put something back in to bind the product. Oftentimes that's things like gums or sugars. So there might be more sugar in a gluten-free product than in its original alternative. So I just think that's interesting.
That is very interesting. And I loved the comparison of, if you had a peanut allergy, or if you didn't have a peanut allergy, why would you ever eat peanut free? So lots of great tips and points made there, I think. Um, for me, what jumped out when I read that as a common myth is that, like you said already, nutrition, what works for Sally might not work for me. So hearing that a gluten-free diet is good for everyone, should make you think a little bit. Another belief out there that I know some people in my family like to believe is that around timing of eating. I've heard 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m., that there's this magic time that we should cut off and not eat anymore, or we're going to gain weight. What are your thoughts on this? Any validity to it?
So what works for Susie doesn't always work for Sally. So the idea here is like, don't eat after 8 p.m. or 6 p.m. or whatever. For most individuals, we've already gotten our calorie needs by that point. We've already had breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, maybe another snack by 8 or whatever time. So anything beyond that is excess, but it's not the 8 o'clock that's the problem. So if you get all of your calories by 1 p.m. and you eat and you eat your snack or whatever at 2 p.m., you're still in excess. So it's not really the timing. It's just making sure that you're not going into calorie excess. So if we think about like someone who works third shift, they're not going to automatically retain more calories because they're eating their calories from 11 to 7 at night, right? So 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. But one thing I really want to emphasize here is if we're looking for overall health or even weight loss is the goal, sleep hygiene is really important. So I do think if you can get your calories before bedtime, that is ideal. But when we eat close to bedtime, our body has to prioritize metabolism over restoration and rest that happens while we're sleeping. So we're just missing an opportunity for deep sleep and as productive sleep if we're trying to digest our food while we're sleeping. So I just like to keep that in mind. And then, making sure that we're understanding that eating right before bed can affect the temperature of your body. It can increase your risk for reflux. So if we're having acid reflux, we don't want to be laying down right after we eat. And sleep is really important for hormones and tissue and organ repair and mental health and nutrition health, right? So if we can have a kind of, I guess, cut off for sleep hygiene, I think that's a little bit more important. But always eat when you're hungry, when you're physiologically hungry. If you are hungry at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. and you're actually experiencing signs of hunger, I wouldn't recommend ignoring that. Like having balanced meals and snacks should prevent that from happening. But if that happens, you're not going to gain more weight just because you're having your snack at 10 p.m.
Now, on the topic of snacking, my last planned myth that I wanted to discuss today is that all snacking is unhealthy. Is this a myth, a fact? If it is, in fact, true, I'm in trouble because I like to have snacks. I am a grazer.
Oh boy, oh boy. So what works for Susie doesn't always work for Sally, right? Snacking is a very beneficial tool, right? So when we go too long between meals and our blood sugar goes low, our body's just desperately trying to get that blood sugar to come back up. So that is when our body will start to be hangry, right? We're going to get irritated. We don't make it as high quality food choices because we're desperate to get that blood sugar up. So I think snacking is a really good tool to prevent overeating and maintaining high quality food choices. So what works for me is I eat probably every 2 to 4 hours and just maintaining balanced snacks throughout the day. But if you have a balanced breakfast, there's nothing to say you have to snack between breakfast and lunch.
That makes sense. So those were all the myths that I had planned. I do want to just address the Q&A, try my best here. So we had one who wanted you to address the myth of vegans don't get enough protein.
Okay, so with veganism, it's just important to be strategic about your protein intake, making sure you're getting all of the essential proteins. So typically, plant foods don't have all of the essential amino acids or proteins that we need. And what I mean by essential is our body doesn't create them, so we have to ingest them. So all animal protein products have all of those essential amino acids, and typically plants have some, but not all. So we have to do what we call protein pairing or complementary proteins. So a good example would be like brown rice and red beans have them. So a few years back, the thought was you had to have them in the same meal. Not true. You can have them throughout the day. That's fine. Basically, a variety of protein-containing plant products, you should be fine. And I think our society in general just thinks that we need more protein than we actually do. So just throwing that out there as well. But the two plant products that have all of those essential proteins are quinoa and amaranth. So if you can throw some quinoa into your meal, then we're hitting all of those essential amino acids.
Great, great. So that's the only myth I saw in the chat as of now. Just want to make sure we had time for that. Any other myths you, Amy, you want to speak to right now?
Yes. Okay. There's a huge myth that eating healthy, we kind of touched on that it's complicated. It doesn't really need to be time consuming. So it's not super time consuming either, in order to create, a healthy meal. And the other myth I want to talk about is that it does not have to be boring or not flavorful. I get a lot of individuals in culinary medicine who really get influenced by social media, and they'll see a healthy meal from like an influencer on social media, and they're like, well, I don't like those things, so I can't eat healthy. No. We can capitalize on the foods that you do like, flavor them in a way that we're not relying on butter, salt, and sugar, and we can really maximize the nutrition that comes from your food. And I think another myth I would like to address, Kelly, is that weight is the most important health marker. Calories are what affects the scale, but your nutrients are what affects your health. So we can see improvements in blood pressure and your cholesterol and your diabetes risk and your blood sugar and all of that. Those things can improve without 1 ounce of weight loss. So I really emphasize to everybody that I come in contact with that we want to focus so much more on nutrients rather than just weight loss, because in the course of weight loss, we can see that disease development. You could eat, say you need 2,000 calories a day. Well, you could eat 1,800, see that scale come down. But if your calories are coming from just ice cream, we can develop diabetes. And so what is the point if we're not creating a healthier body?
Great. So some more questions have come in. Can you have too much protein?
Yes, that is a challenge. So our bodies can only digest and absorb 20 to 25 grams, up to 30 at a time. So if you are being strategic about your protein intake, you can quote unquote overdose on protein, and that wreaks havoc on your kidneys and your overall health. However, beyond that 20 to 30 range, anything that you eat in one setting kind of just ends up in your large intestine and then the sewer. So I caution people with like overdoing it on protein at a meal, as well as like over supplementing or supplementing really at all. I'm a very food first dietitian.
Okay, and there's one more question, but I just want to give you an opportunity because I know people have to jump because we're all close to time. Can you tell us a little bit more about the culinary medicine program at Geisinger?
Yes. So for the individuals on the call, Culinary Medicine is a free program. It's 4 weeks, so 4 consecutive weeks, where you get 8 hours with me, a registered dietitian and culinary medicine specialist, where we talk about the how and why behind eating healthy. I teach you how to do it. I teach you why to do it. And then to do it in a way that actually tastes good, that makes sense, that it's not super complicated, that it's inexpensive. So really all the things we've talked about here today. So to sign up, it's www.geisinger.org/cooking. And we have online and in-person classes. Our in-person classes are in Selinsgrove at the Susquehanna Valley Mall in my teaching kitchen behind me. And we also have healthcare provider classes as well. So if you're looking to learn more about that, you can email us at culinarymedicine@geisinger.edu. No, yes, geisinger.edu. And I'd be glad to share more information about that. But it's completely free. You do not need to be Geisinger affiliated at all. So you don't have to even be a patient or an employee. So you can bring your friends, you can bring your sister, whatever. And I do have kids classes in August. So throwing that out there as well.
I did throw that website there in the chat. So for those of you who cannot, I want to hit Kelly your question. I see who cannot stay on. Thank you for joining us today. Tune in next month. Goodness, my memory's failing me here for our conversation on keeping it positive, self-esteem, body image, and acceptance. So thank you all. If you have to hop, one last question we will address is thoughts on intermittent fasting. It's a doozy, I'm sure.
What works for Susie doesn't work for Sally. However, the science there, in my professional opinion, I don't think it's a great strategy. So one of my rules of thumb when it comes to any like diet or lifestyle change is that, is it truly a lifestyle change? Can you see yourself doing this at 90 years old, right? I don't really think intermittent fasting is appropriate for a lot of people because we're going too long between meals. And then what happens is we have binging that occurs during your eating window, or we're choosing the wrong types of meals. So I've watched videos on YouTube of individuals who are intermittent fasting and they're so hungry when it comes to their time to eat, that they're eating hot dogs with Fruity Pebbles on them. And that's not really a health promoting choice. So I like to kind of steer clear from intermittent fasting myself, and for my patients. The one thing I really want to emphasize is that you're intentionally ignoring your body signals. Your body is telling you you're hungry. And if we're learning how to ignore that, we're also going to ignore when our body is full because we only have X amount of hours to eat. So I think there are better strategies for a health promoting diet for sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. I'm sure we could talk about this all day, but I want to be mindful of your time. The last thing, Amy, if you have any good granola recipes, we have someone who would love one of those. So you can share it with me, and I believe Teresa, I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
Sure. Teresa, come check out Culinary Medicine. I have a feeling you'd love it if you want to know a granola recipe. Yes, of course. So I can share that with Kelly.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Amy, for your time, your expertise. Any other questions, feel free. Any feedback, you can email wellness@geisinger.edu. But really, we hope you found today useful and relatable, and join us next month in April for our episode on keeping it positive self-esteem, body image, and acceptance. Thank you all.
Thanks.